Elizabeth, a quiet and modest girl, was an excellent student at school. She grew up without a father, and her mother never told her about him. They lived in a small apartment. The woman had no good education and had to work as a cleaner at the same school where Elizabeth was a student. This was the cause for constant taunts from her classmates, who made snide remarks about the girl's appearance and her mother's work on a daily basis. The salary of the school cleaning lady was barely enough for food and necessities, so all the girls' clothes, though always clean and ironed, were shabby and unfashionable. Elizabeth could hardly keep from crying and tried to ignore the mockery. The only joy that kept Elizabeth going to school was Patrick. They shared a desk with him from first grade through high school graduation and were practically inseparable. It was unclear to everyone what a modest A student and a spoilt troublemaker with C's could have in common. Patrick followed Elizabeth everywhere. He was carrying her heavy briefcase with her books in the morning and evening, and the boy also tried to treat Elizabeth every day with something, from expensive and tasty cookies in bright packaging to exotic sweets she had never tasted, and such care often made her very uncomfortable. Elizabeth was always waiting for some of her classmates to stop laughing at them, calling them bride and groom. Patrick grew up in a well-off family. His father worked at the mayor's office and the boy never needed anything. Being aware of Elizabeth, his parents were strongly against this relationship, and they constantly told Patrick that the girl was not a match for him. They predicted a great future for their son, and in their opinion, a cleaning lady's daughter could not pretend to be the wife of their only son. Patrick listened to his parents' lectures, but continued to date Elizabeth. They had agreed long ago that right after graduation they would apply to law school and then get married. It was Elizabeth's choice to go to law school. She had always wanted to become a lawyer and help people obtain justice, but Patrick felt no particular inclination to study and decided to keep company with his sweetheart. He knew that his parents would have no problem paying his education. The documents for college were filed, and the young couple began to prepare for their wedding secretly. They bought 2 simple wedding rings and waited impatiently for the appointed date, thinking that no one would be able to stop them. But things didn't go according to plan when one of Patrick's friends blabbed to his mother about the future marriage, and she in turn immediately shared the news with Mrs. Murphy, Patrick's mother. The shocked woman could not allow the unequal marriage, and on the day of the wedding she stormed into the ceremony. "Never, do you hear me? Never such a dirty beggar, such a nobody as you will become the wife of my son," shouted Mrs. Murphy in fury right in Elizabeth's face, and grabbing the wedding rings, threw them into the far corner. The woman grabbed Patrick by the arm and literally dragged him out of the hall, and Elizabeth remained standing in tears, numb with resentment. The girl was hurt, but not because of the words said to her. She had been used to it since high school. What really hurt her heart was the behavior of her beloved, who did not even try to protect her and just left her alone on their wedding day and obediently followed his mother. After this event, Patrick's parents tried to make sure that Elizabeth and Patrick never saw each other again. His father used his connections, and in a few days Patrick went to study at a college in the other end of the country, so Elizabeth didn't even know where he was. But after what happened, though, she was very upset. Elizabeth seriously doubted the sincerity of Patrick's feelings. She successfully passed the entrance exams and enrolled in college. Elizabeth was totally immersed in her studies and made great progress. As for Patrick, his studies did not go well. The boy often broke the order in the educational institution, skipped classes, arranged fights, and became so impudent that one day the principal of the college could not stand it and expelled Patrick from the institution. After hearing such news about his son, the father had a stroke and remained paralyzed. The family's financial situation was markedly shaken because the bedridden man could no longer work. 5 years later, there was almost nothing left of the financial cushion. The family got used to living without refusing anything, but it played a cruel joke on them. Patrick's mother began to think about work, but the difficulty was that she had been a housewife all her life, living off her husband, and had no idea where she could work. With no education, no experience, and given her advanced age, the only positions she could be offered were as a clerk, checkroom attendant, or cleaning lady. The checkroom attendant position did not suit her, and she was paid too little, so Mrs. Murphy, having pacified her pride, took a job as a cleaner in an office not far from her home. Patrick, with his bad temper and lack of education, could not pretend to have a good job either, so he took a job at a warehouse as a loader. But even the 2 salaries and the father's disability pension were barely enough for the whole family living. One day Mrs. Murphy's car broke down. It was already old, and the repairman assured Mrs. Murphy that repairs would cost more than buying a new one. So she decided to take out a loan and gradually pay it off. Mrs. Murphy went to a small financial organization where she could get a loan without proof of income. After signing the contract, she did not immediately notice the clause about the lender's right to change the interest rate, which was written in small print, but she realized this immediately after the first payment, when the amount she had to pay increased several times. The family's budget could not withstand such huge monthly payments, and soon they had delinquencies and threats from the lender. When it came to confiscating the apartment against the debt, Mrs. Murphy began frantically trying to figure out where to get the money. She attempted to ask numerous friends and acquaintances who used to spend all the holidays at their house, but all she got in return were guilty excuses. Some simply reported big recent purchases and lack of money, while others just shrugged it off before they could even think of anything. And then in desperation, Mrs. Murphy decided to get a lawyer's help by going to the nearest public office. When Mrs. Murphy entered the office, she practically lost the power of speech. Elizabeth, her son's former love, was sitting behind the expensive desk. She was in a perfectly tailored suit, well groomed and beautiful. The woman could not even think that while her son was sinking lower and lower, the girl was able to successfully finish law school and become a highly qualified specialist in demand. Elizabeth looked up from her papers and offered a seat to the visitor. She easily recognized her failed mother-in-law. Elizabeth could not forget the humiliation she had gone through many years ago, but tried not to show her excitement in any way. After listening to the woman and studying the documents, the woman promised to help. When Mrs. Murphy returned home, she told Patrick everything. The woman was waving her hands emotionally, telling her son how successful and important the cleaning lady's daughter had become. Mrs. Murphy suggested that her son try to reconcile with Elizabeth right after the case was over. She was sure that Elizabeth would immediately forgive Patrick and happily agree to marry him. The woman did not even consider the idea that she could refuse such a generous proposal. And meanwhile, Elizabeth was able to help her failed relatives. She quickly proved the unlawful claims of the creditor, showing herself to be a high-class specialist, and did not take money from Mrs. Murphy for her services. After a short time, Mrs. Murphy went to the law office again, but she took Patrick with her. "Elizabeth, good morning. And we came to ask your forgiveness for the past. We were wrong, but you won't hold a grudge, will you? Now, I don't mind that you two are getting married. You're an educated woman now, respected by everybody." From such insolence and self-confidence, Elizabeth did not even fully immediately find something to say. She was especially struck again by the silent Patrick, who was still incapable of deciding his own fate. "Thank you, but marriage causes me bad memories, so I'm not likely to get married anytime soon," Elizabeth said calmly and confidently after coping with her excitement. "And now I ask you to leave the office. I'm waiting for my next client." Elizabeth shifted her gaze to the papers, letting them know that the conversation was over. Everything in her life was fine, and she certainly did not plan to return to such a past.